I'm Zoe Skoulding and I live on Ynys Môn, the island of Anglesey. And the starting point of my poetry when I moved to Wales a long time ago was always being in two places at once, because everywhere has two names. So I write in English in bilingual North Wales, which means a constant questioning of what it means to see the world through this particular language. And that's led me to be interested in translation, which is another aspect of my writing, and also the points at which we tune in and out of language or hear it as sound in different environments. And poetry, for me, is what happens when you hear words rather than absorbing meaning. And it's also the opening to other kinds of listening to the world and what's in it. The collection A Marginal Sea has been mainly written here, though there are many journeys in it and quite a lot of lostness or deliberate disorientation. This is partly a response to writing in a language like English that has so often imposed its own way of seeing on other places. It's also a reaction to the bewildering dislocation of the years in which it was written post-Brexit. I live in Wales, on an island in the Irish Sea, a marginal sea of the Atlantic Ocean. And when I think of living on an island, I think of its relationship to other islands and their histories. The image of the UK as an isolated island nation has been very damaging, and we need new ways of imagining this archipelago, new kinds of archipelagic thinking. This is a book with a lot of journeys in it, and some of them are to places I've actually been to, like Cholula in Mexico. And that was a place that gave me a different way of thinking about time and about the connection between European colonisation of the Americas and this very driven, compressed time that we currently inhabit. On the other hand, there's a poem that mentions Havana, but I've never been to Cuba, and I'm interested in the poem as a kind of imaginative travel that brings you back to where you are. Sometimes it's a map that makes me think about somewhere else, and sometimes it's another kind of text, like, for example, this book, which is a maritime vocabulary published in Brazil in 1975. It has nautical terms in it, translated between English, French, Spanish and Portuguese. And I found it really fascinating as a record of the languages generated by the sea. The sea is a place of work and sort of travel and transport and exchange, and that's fed into this book quite considerably. Every morning I walk around my town of Porthaethwy or Menai Bridge, and I come through this patch of woodland, Coed Cyrnol. There are red squirrels in this wood, but they are extremely difficult to spot. Let's say the sky's all yours in a jump for thin branches, shy crowns giving flight to impossible belief, its luminescence falling through canopy when you're all claws, in stellar twigs, bud clusters streaked inside with sap, a hidden line unfolding while shadows hold still on shattered glass. Whose spiral and spring comes on the hour, on time you say, but whose? The question posed by an island is who you share it with and how. And that's a problem for humans, obviously, but also for the other creatures we cohabit with. And as I was writing this book, I very much enjoyed Elizabeth Jane Burnett's Of Sea, which charts her encounters with invertebrates while swimming off the coast of Devon. So in a time of declining species, naming and noticing becomes more important. But the poem isn't just a means of describing, and hers are not just that. It can also be a way of stretching the imagination into relationships with other beings. Gulls are such a familiar presence in UK towns and cities that people are often very surprised to learn that they're globally endangered and that their population in the UK is extremely reduced. So they've moved inland because of the crisis of declining fish in the sea and also the poor management of waste in cities. And so they're inextricably linked with human activities and at the same time maligned for their resourceful scavenging. So when I want to address myself to birds, it's not really because I think they're going to hear me, but because poetry seems like a one-sided communicative act, an expression that organises sound into something that's not wholly reliant on semiotic meaning, but which is a meaningful performance, just as the cries of gulls are meaningful, and we belong in that same shared space of sound. This gull has nested in my garden a couple of years running, but to her, it's not a garden and it's not mine. It's a rock that happens to be by the sea. And I think that perspective of the sea changes perceptions of land and ownership and territory in quite interesting ways. And finally, a poem for the curlew, which I can't think about without remembering Lynette Roberts's wonderful poem about a curlew, so great Welsh poet who was fascinated by the bird life around her. So she's also kind of haunting this poem. Gylfinir Curlew Numenius Arquata. Fluting shade, fluting on water, its spring sun, its war again still, and its scissor and scalpel into the sludge, a curlew calling on the edge of Europe, errant in whose airspace sky-darkling croon, confused alarms, tactic and strategy, here come invisible hounds, the dead vibrating out of voice in instant composition, or composition of instants, a courier running and losing ground in lieu of this tidal absence, just about holding a tune.